culture.
Spider-Man is considered to be one of the greatest comic book characters of all time, and it's not really that hard to see why. He's been a Marvel mainstay for years, and his films have been pretty stellar. Well, except for 3, but let's just not think about that. Going back to the comic books though, Spidey's history is as fascinating as you might expect for a character who's been around for over 50 years. Along the way, there's been lots of weird and unexpected moments in the life of Peter Parker, with some massive reveals and twists which not even the most die-hard Spider-Man fan may know. So many, in fact, that we're doing a double-sized list of his most obscure moments. With this in mind, I'm Jules for WhatCulture.com, and this is 20 mind-blowing facts you didn't know about Spider-Man. Number 20. He has radioactive sperm, apparently. Spider-Man Reign showed a possible future for Peter Parker in a world similar to that of Batman's The Dark Knight Returns, in which an aged Spidey once again decides to suit up in a bid to save the citizens of a corrupted New York City, and it's revealed that he buried his costume with his wife Mary Jane Watson after her death. But how does she die? Well, it turns out that it's not only Spider-Man's blood which is radioactive, and years of contact with Peter's other bodily fluids resulted in her eventual death. So sex with Spider-Man can kill you, apparently. Here's hoping that Peter gave Black Cat a quick heads up after Mary Jane's demise either way. Number 19. He might be Jewish. Marvel has never directly addressed Spider-Man's religious beliefs, despite the fact that they've never had an issue with portraying Daredevil's Catholicism in his comics. Regardless, it's still widely believed that Peter Parker is actually Jewish. His dialogue has frequently been littered with Yiddish lines, and his religious background has even been confirmed to some degree thanks to comments from Stan Lee and actor Andrew Garfield. Even if he's not a practicing Jew, it's a shame that Marvel missed this opportunity to tell some stories about that part of Spidey's life. Number 18. He was almost The Fly. When Stan Lee was tasked with creating a new superhero to follow in the footsteps of the Fantastic Four, who were extremely popular at the time, he thought up Marvel's next hit after seeing a fly on the wall. According to the legendary comic book writer, that got him thinking about a superhero who could stick to walls, and the names Fly Man and Insect Man were some of his ideas before he settled on Spider-Man. There's famously a lot of controversy about how much of a role Steve Ditko played in his creation, but Spider-Man, who Marvel bosses at the time thought was a terrible idea, could have ended up being a very different character. Number 17. He was never really that much of a nerd. One of the biggest complaints about both of Spider-Man's film origin stories is the fact he wasn't portrayed as being anywhere near the nerd he was in the comic books. They seem to forget that while he started off as a wallflower, Peter Parker received a massive confidence boost after being granted his amazing powers. He had a girlfriend by issue 7, ditched his glasses and even started beating up the school bully by issue 8, and then he spent his college years being fought over by the beautiful Mary Jane Watson and Gwen Stacy. Long story short, Spidey may have been a bit of a nerd, but not as much as you might think. Number 16. He once transformed into a spider. Spider-Man has undergone various transformations over the years. He even had 6 arms at one point. However, one of the most bizarre came when he literally became a giant spider. This is all part of a convoluted storyline which seemed to only exist to bring the comics and movies closer together, as the end result saw him gain organic web shooters like the ones featured in Sam Raimi's movies. This new status quo lasted for a few years, but Spider-Man eventually went back to his organic mechanical shooters as part of a reboot of sorts in Brand New Day. Number 15. He has a clone. The 90s was a bit of a dark and weird time for comic book fans, with Spider-Man in particular suffering from the divisive and convoluted clone saga. Picking up on a plot thread from the 70s, Spidey discovered that he wasn't actually the real Peter Parker. Instead, he was a clone, and the original Peter had been living his life elsewhere as Ben Reilly for the last few years. Things got even more baffling with the introduction of additional clones and a pregnant Mary Jane. Despite the fact it was ultimately revealed that Ben was the clone, stories like the Clone Saga were what very nearly put Marvel out of business during this period. Number 14. His greatest enemy got his girlfriend pregnant. One of the most controversial Spider-Man stories of all time, it was revealed in Sin's past that Gwen Stacy had an affair with a middle-aged Norman Osborn. She fled to Europe and had twins in secret, but the Goblin serum in their system caused them to age rapidly, and they returned years later to try and kill Spider-Man after Norman successfully found and brainwashed them. The story also revealed that Peter and Gwen had never had sex, and many fans felt like it completely ruined the legacy of one of the only handful of characters who've actually remained dead. Number 13. His body was stolen by Dr. Octopus. Another controversial story featured Dr. Octopus, in which he switched minds with Spider-Man, leaving Peter to die in Otto's broken body. A fragment of the original Spidey's mind remained within his own, but the status quo would not return for some time. During that period, Ock murdered villains, considered seducing Mary Jane, which is something close to rape, and also got Peter a doctorate, so that was nice. Bizarrely, pretty much no one noticed that their friend was acting and speaking completely differently, and while the superior Spider-Man had his fans, most were very relieved when Peter once again took control of his body. Number 12. He has a way with the ladies. Peter Parker has suffered many tragedies during his time as Spider-Man, but at least he's found comfort with plenty of beautiful women. Betty Brant, Liz Allen, Gwen Stacy, and Mary Jane Watson have all been involved with Peter over the years, while the Black Cat is someone he was also hooking up with on a casual basis until very recently. There have been plenty of others too, even Ms. Marvel considered dating him at one point. But one of the weirdest love interests for Spidey has to be Gwen Stacy's grown-up daughter, although he did quickly reject her to be fair. Number 11. He has a genius-level intellect. Peter Parker was always a science whiz, but he spent most of his comic book life unemployed or working for the Daily Bugle as a photographer. Spider-Man would often come up with clever ways of defeating his villains, but it wasn't until he started working for Horizon Labs that Peter was really able to let his genius-level intellect shine. Now, Spidey has a doctorate and runs Parker Industries. The company is currently looking for ways to cure supervillains of their powers, but most fans are waiting to see Peter become one of the Marvel Universe's greatest minds alongside the likes of Tony Stark and Reed Richards. Number 10. He was a member of the Fantastic Four. Although they were working under the guise of the Future Foundation at the time, Spidey was part of the Fantastic Four at one stage. Following the tragic death of the Human Torch, the remaining members gathered at the reading of the will to try and reunite the team. What better way to replace the group's wisecracking, charismatic hero than with another? As a welcoming present, Spider-Man was gifted a brand new suit which never got dirty, and he was also able to change the design off with his mind. Number 9. He has died more than once. Spider-Man has died a few times now, but it's never really taken him too long to return. One notable example is The Other. Beaten within an inch of his life by a villain called Morlun, a broken and one-eyed Peter Parker mustered up his last bit of energy to kill the villain and save his wife Mary Jane Watson. So how long did it take for him to return? 2 issues. Even in the Ultimate Universe, where his demise appeared to be permanent, he's recently been revealed to be alive and well. There's just no keeping this iconic hero down. Number 8. He once worked as a high school science teacher. Considered to be one of the best periods in Peter Parker's comic book life by fans, he spent quite a few years serving as a high school science teacher. This opened the door to a ton of new storytelling possibilities, and Spider-Man was often seen doing his best to help his students in and out of the classroom. Unfortunately, revealing his identity during Civil War brought his chosen career path to an abrupt end. And it's something that hasn't been touched on since. However, Spidey is currently serving as a guidance counselor in the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning, so maybe we'll see another tangent come soon. Number 7. He was a TV star. Neither of the movies focused on this, but after defeating Crusher Creel in a wrestling bout, Spider-Man actually became a TV star. He created a flashy new costume and then began doing stunts on late-night TV shows and specials. Depending on which version of his origin story you read, this career went on for quite some time, until that fateful night where he let a robber go who went on to kill his Uncle Ben in a home invasion. Regardless, he would soon give up his 15 minutes of fame in order to focus on being a superhero, and thus the Amazing Spider-Man was born. Number 6. He sold his marriage to the devil. This one is complicated. After his Aunt May was shot by a sniper hired by the Kingpin, Spider-Man searched high and low for somebody to save her. Ultimately, the only one who could was the demonic Mephisto. In return, he wanted the marriage of Peter Parker and Mary Jane, which was weird. It was all just done so that Marvel could reboot Spider-Man and make him younger and freeing him from being a married man. Fans weren't exactly happy, but it also resulted in a crazily convoluted explanation for why nobody remembered Spider-Man unmasking during Civil War. Basically, nobody remembers it, but if he unmasks in front of them, they suddenly do. Number 5. His powers are also mystic in nature. You might think that it was a radioactive spider which granted Peter Parker his extraordinary abilities, but it turns out that the spider already had the ability to transfer those powers. The radiation just caused it to die. In actual fact, an ancient force had already chosen him to become Spider-Man, and he acts as a totem. This is why so many of his enemies have been animalistic in nature: Rhino, Vulture, etc. It may sound goofy, but it was a refreshing and interesting interpretation of Spidey's origin, and one that's remained part of the canon since. However, whether it was destiny or radioactivity has not been confirmed either way. Number 4. His web fluid lasts only an hour. Just like in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, Peter Parker crafted some web shooters for himself as a teenager in order to get around. However, luckily for window cleaners and the bad guys he uses it on, his webbing dissolves after an hour or so. Now, that did change when Spider-Man started using organic webbing for a time, but the reason why it only lasts this long is actually a lot cleverer than just keeping his city tidy. Stan Lee created this proviso in order to avoid Peter being able to sell his formula, thus getting rich off an effective new adhesive. Number 3. He takes those photos of himself as Spider-Man in a certain way. During his teen years, Peter Parker earned money by taking photos of himself as Spider-Man. However, the question came up, how exactly did he manage to get such great shots from just webbing his camera to a wall and setting a timer? Well, a recent story by Dan Slott revealed that his system wasn't quite as simple as that. Instead, Peter sewed a sensor into his costume which would make his camera take a few shots each time he passed in front of the lens. It's a strangely convoluted explanation, but it does explain how he was always able to get the photos that the professionals simply couldn't. Number 2. His parents worked for S.H.I.E.L.D. Fans already knew that Peter Parker was an orphan, but it was revealed in the late 60s that there was more to his parents than meets the eye. Richard and Mary Parker were revealed to be government agents, serving as heroes long before their son suited up as Spider-Man. Funnily enough though, his parents were actually responsible for the first team-up between Spidey and Wolverine. A pregnant Mary and her husband actually saved Wolverine during a mission, but they were later killed by the Red Skull after their son was born. Robot versions of these two were introduced at one point, but the less said about that story the better. And number 1, he wasn't Marvel's first Spider-Man. Spider-Man made his debut in the final issue of Amazing Fantasy, but it wasn't exactly Marvel's first spider-themed character. In the 1950s, comic book readers weren't really all that interested in superheroes, so monsters and sci-fi stories dominated. Just a month before Spidey appeared in the Marvel Universe, an issue of Journey into Mystery featured a tale called Where Will You Be When the Spider Strikes?, which focused on a normal household spider who was transformed by radioactive rays. This man-spider could speak but was killed by the issue's end, and it's actually a shame that he never turned back up to face Spider-Man. And that's our list. Got any more facts about the webbed warrior that we'd whiffed? Well, let us know about them in the comments section below. And if you want to get touched up by my 8 limbs, then you can do so on Twitter at RetroJ with a 0. As always, I've been Jules for WhatCulture.com, and I'll speak to you soon.